Is there anything you'd like to share that you feel is connected to the journey you did? And what are you noticing, if anything? So I wouldn't say even different. It's just, what is your experience of you right now? And, in essence, what are you getting from this? How is this for you? I do check in, though, with the part. Like, remember we had a part that was really afraid? Like, there was a man I sat with. He was in his early 70s, had no idea how this was going to go because he had a lot of specificity. And yet, in the medicine, he just opened up. And he had such presence and such perspective.
Hello. Welcome to the Personal Pizza Podcast. I'm your host, Simcha Levenberg. Today, we have pizza, but I'm all alone because it's a remote episode. Our guest, Nancy Morgan, was not able to come into the kitchen. It's a bummer, but rest assured, we have a very, very nice episode for you. We're talking about 3 topics. The first is internal family systems, which is a type of therapy that Nancy was the person who told me about it, and it really has affected me, my personal life, and also my professional life. Second, we're going to be speaking about Nancy's role as a guide. She is guiding folks on psychedelic-assisted journeys in the state of Oregon, where it is legal. Finally, we're going to speak about adverse child experiences. This is a study called ACEs. It's a huge, massive study that measures the effect of traumatic childhood experiences and how they influence us all the way into adulthood. So today's pizza is a classic Neapolitan, which is not really behaving well, but what can you do? We'll do what we can over here, and you please enjoy the episode.
If you could, Nancy, you are a master of internal family systems. You train people in internal family systems. You consult. You're probably in some IFS groups. In layman's terms, using the parlance of our times, what is IFS? What is internal family systems in simple terms?
In simple terms, it's the name of a therapeutic modality that Richard Schwartz, goes by the name Dick Schwartz, developed starting in the early 80s. And it is something that has been embraced. It took a while to get off the ground because it's very different from other therapeutic modalities, primarily in that it recognizes that we all have the capacity to heal. And that is, psychology hadn't quite gone there. We've been sort of locked into the coping mechanisms for a long time. IFS recognizes that not only do we have the ability and power to heal, but that it comes from within us. That Michael Mithoefer refers to it as our inner healing intelligence. And Michael, for people who are in the psychedelic world and research world with MDMA, know the name Michael and Annie Mithoefer. They were both trained by Dick Schwartz. So the work of connecting with any sort of healing guidance doesn't have to be connected to psychedelics. You can just do IFS.
Oh, okay. Well, hold on one second.
Yep.
Don't jump into psychedelics just yet. Hold off on the mushroom talk because we're headed there. But okay. Dick, one of the foundational principles of IFS that differentiates it from traditional therapy is this capacity to heal rather than just changing behaviors or symptom reduction.
Right.
I'm wondering, could you, any other noticeable differences? Here's one. Let me set you up here. It's a non-pathologizing model. I'm wondering if you could speak about that.
There's no disordered and there's no abnormal in a non-pathologizing model. What there is a recognition that we adapt to external constraints in our environment from the moment that we are conceived. And we're constantly adapting. So very often when things happen to us and there's no one there as little kids to help us co-regulate, to help us, then we have nothing left to do but develop our own protective response. So in IFS, this is going to give you some of the scaffolding of IFS. In IFS, rather than seeing that maybe a client is treatment resistant, therapy resistant, has their defenses up, IFS looks at it through the lens of protection. There is a system that is protecting itself because whatever environment might have caused the wound in the beginning is similar to something that might show up later in our life. And so those protective responses are going to come out again. And there are two primary types of protective responses. One is proactive. It's always, there's this looking over the bow, never again. If it had a mantra, never again. And so it's doing all the things in our lives that will theoretically help us stay safe, even coming right down to locking our doors or living in a gated community. Or how to behave in public, how not to behave, how to dress, how not. It's comprehensive. And that typically works for a long time in terms of creating a sense of safety. And what is it that's being kept safe? What's being kept safe is a system that, if it didn't have all of this regulation happening all the time, might result in feeling some of those feelings that were so scary and so painful when the protective response developed. So it's a protective response to kind of maintain homeostasis in a system and not to have a system be overwhelmed, flooded by emotions. And then there's one other...
Real quick. So we're in the system here, the inner system that every individual has. And so you've named that there is a proactive part of the system that is never again. And that is, we call that a manager, right?
It's managing all the time.
And it's protecting through all of this constant vigilance. It is protecting these exiles, right? Which are these difficult...
The exiled emotions, the parts of us that are holding the wounds, carrying the pain. Because when that floods us, it's overwhelming. And so the desire is keep that at bay. Don't go into those emotionally tender areas.
So that's proactive. And
Right.
now I know the answer because I've taken IFS 1. There's probably a reactive part to the system as well.
Right, exactly. And that one is identified as the firefighter. It's reactive. So think about a firefighter where they're at the station and they are basically there always at the ready for when the alarm goes off. And where there's smoke, there's fire. And what do firefighters do? They get in their engines, they go to your house. If your house is on fire and you're not there, they don't knock at the door. They will take the axe and they'll break the door down. And it doesn't matter if you have rare paintings and beautiful Persian rugs. The goal is get the fire out. And so that's what they do. And when the fire's out, they leave without concern about the collateral damage, because the big issue is getting the fire out. Well, that happens internally, and it's the emotional fire. It's the emotional flames, the pain. Somehow that managing didn't do enough. So why not? Because typically our family of origin or our partners, the people who we have the most vulnerability around, are often going to be those same people that can most easily trigger our tender spots. And so if we can't manage it, then we'll typically have a firefighter response that comes to numb it out, fight it out, escape it, but it's always reactive. So the manager's proactive and it says, never again. I'm going to plan, so never again. The firefighter says, when all else fails, that's what I'm here for.
So there's these three broad categories. What are the different types, different versions of firefighters and different, maybe, I don't know, spirit animals they represent for a lot of people, if we could think, Jungian for a second, or what type of managers are out there? The exiles, I think we've named the painful shame,
exile
trauma,
is
burdens.
Any tender part of us that's holding pain or shame or feeling unlovable or unworthy, because that was the message and it hurts. So we don't want, managing parts don't want to let that out. So in its most extreme, when I work with clients, the most extreme managers I've ever encountered are people diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder. The firefighter doesn't even get kind of a chance to come in. Everything is managed and regulated all the time. And why? To stay safe, to stay non-contaminated, to stay okay. So, what we're talking about here, Scott, too, are energies, parts of us that are holding, in IFS parlance, burdens. The exiles hold the burdens of the pain they feel. The protectors hold the burdens of the jobs that they have. So the manager's job is to manage. And that can become such a burden because they'll do everything they can in their power to respond to situations, and so often will get the exact opposite result of what they're wanting. So they will go from maybe not so rigid up to that extreme rigidity. Does that make sense?
It does, and I'm just wondering. I want to talk about the polarization of the parts with each other, but what I'm hearing now is that if you have a perfectionist part, for example, that wants to protect you from experiencing shame,
right?
Therefore you're grinding, burning the midnight oil, and you're pushing really hard, and then to protect yourself from shame. But that part could also have shame, because if you get negative feedback from other people for that very perfectionist part, that you're driving people away, and therefore it's carrying its own shame.
That's exactly right. And then what does it try? It tries to do it better or different or harder. And that's what I'm talking about. It gets the opposite result of what it's hoping for, because these parts of us work really, really hard. Really hard. And most of this forms when we're little kids that are in the single digits of age. Why? Because that's when we are most vulnerable, and that's when we need to rely on others to be there for us in the ways we can't be there for ourselves. And we all know that just isn't always possible, even in the best families and best circumstances. Before we go too much further, the other sort of range of responses in the firefighter category, first thing is often to distract. Okay, so the managing's not working, feelings are coming up. Okay, so distract. So what do? That's when we're going to go to social media. That's exactly. Just distract. But sometimes that doesn't work. So maybe we're going to eat. Maybe we're going to binge. Maybe we're going to do whatever it is that'll help us just not feel those feelings. So alcohol comes in, or anything that's going to take us out of those feelings. In its most extreme, we start to get a deep desperation, and basically the be-all and end-all final firefighter that comes out when nothing is working, the pain is overwhelming, is going to be a part that says, okay, I'll take you out of it. We're going to take you out of this life. This will be suicide. But the part's intention is to just get out of the pain, and nothing else is working. And that's why addiction is so challenging, because you mentioned shame in the managers. Well, there's shame in the firefighter because society shames the firefighter activities. And if you look at the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, you can really break it down to managers and protectors in terms of diagnoses. The behaviors that are deemed abnormal, are so often, or the reason so many people are incarcerated or homeless, are behaviors that are associated with our firefighters.
And in their core, have noble intentions.
Absolutely.
And are adaptive.
Completely adaptive.
Just often create suffering and don't play well with others.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So here's a question for you. What is the role of a therapist in IFS? What are you doing in the room?
Okay. First thing is, I stumbled into IFS January of 2016 when I did a week-long retreat with Dick at Esalen. And I could feel my system literally like recalibrating, because I hadn't heard this before. And yet every single thing made ultimate sense to me. And then when I watched Dick do demos with people, I could feel the shifts that were happening, and I could feel healing happening, but not just in the person in the demo. I could feel my system benefiting from it. So I was profoundly moved. Before then, I was doing all of the therapies I'd been trained in, and I would, mostly without knowing it, be colluding with clients' managers to try to get the firefighters to stop doing what they're doing.
Symptom reduction.
Symptom reduction, yep. And so, but I didn't know any better. So now I have this new view and recognize My role, and if we don't get to psychedelics, it's the same role in sitting for somebody in this psychedelic space. My role as a therapist is to connect with the person from my greatest healing intelligence, my capital S self energy, because every single person has it, even if it doesn't look like it, and even if they don't believe they do. So an example of a client that would likely not believe that they could ever have something called self energy. We can talk about that later if we want to go into it a little more, what that is. Would be somebody diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, who a lot of therapists won't even see. And because that person tends to attach so closely to the therapist, and then the therapist often get in over their heads, and they don't do a very good job of working with these folks that are desperate for connection and holding an incredible amount of pain. So as an IFS therapist, I'm sitting with anybody, it doesn't matter who they are, and really just bringing my self energy there for as long as it takes to really have their system start to relax and be able to get a sense of what might be possible here. I don't break down the model and identify it to them. I'm mostly knowing that I'm engaging with their managers right off the bat. And once the managers start to trust me, I kind of do a warm handoff over to the client and start asking them questions to ask their managers. And we start building a relationship called a self-to-part relationship for the client.
So you don't lay out the model for them. And I'm wondering about learning of there is a real language in the IFS world. It's cult adjacent because it's not, but there's a way of speaking that is, and it's important, not just in like a goofy way, but in a very clear way, and I've heard you speak this way. And I often, if I'm really in a present space and feeling unblended from my parts, I can also will talk this way about parts of myself. But I'm wondering, how do you ease the client into this different way of looking at the system? Is it experiential, or are you so you're not taking out a whiteboard?
Nope. No, for me, it's purely experiential. I know I'm speaking with the parts. I'm building relationship. And at some point, though, IFS, and I'm known in IFS, people would know, okay, I've learned about this IFS. I read a book. I want to work with an IFS therapist. So then they come to me. I know that it's their manager part, hoping this is a tool that's going to help. It's going to be something that's going to help a manager. And there will be a lot of detailed questions often. And so I'll answer them because I'm building relationship with that part. But I don't have an agenda to teach somebody the model. I'll meet them where they come in. There is something called parts mapping, where if somebody's working with me and they've just got all these, you mentioned blended, I love that term because it so explains what happens when all of a sudden we shift and suddenly we're coming from a different energetic, emotional place. And when I notice that and I pause somebody and say, did you just notice a shift? And they'll very often just slow down and go, yeah, you know what? I did. And if we have paper and some writing materials, pens or pencils, I'll say, we can map this out and maybe see what just happened. Where were you before? What were we talking about? And then what shifted? And sometimes when they're able to have it out on a piece of paper in front of them and they recognize the relationship between something that activated them and some other energy that came in, it helps them unblend. And then they are able to have more of a perspective. And then we get to go back in and say, let's get to know those parts. Okay.
That was a helpful answer. And it reminded me of a question that I've had and an issue that I have, which is the manager part of myself who wants me to be a mentally well, psychologically sound person and has an agenda there of symptom reduction or just being more popular and everybody liking me more. can sometimes get conflated with what you said, self with a capital S. And so I'm wondering how do we as therapists find our own self energy, and then how do I know if I'm in if I'm with self, or if I'm just like it living in like this is like a Trojan horse, and like inside of this self is just like another little part, carrying his own burdens. How do you differentiate self and parts?
It's a pretty big question. All right, so I believe the moment we name something, we're minimizing it when we conceptualize it. So love is a good example. But I see self-energy and love as the same thing. But love has so many different interpretations. I think what I'm referencing when I say self-energy, and that is the capital S self that grew out of a series of questions that Dick was asking clients 40 years ago when he stumbled upon this. And when a client said, oh, okay, that what I'm feeling right now, no, that's not a part. That's just me. It's myself. And Dick noticed whenever people said that, of course, they were unblended at that point, they seemed to have a presence and a calm and a clarity. And that's what Dick came to recognize after he continued meeting with people and finding that if you get enough space, a person will hit this place that's really, there's a lot of equanimity. And again, I see a lot of calm. And so, and that these qualities are healing qualities. So we have this capacity. And I mentioned the protective system, managers, firefighters, and what they're protecting. The system from overwhelm of that's why it's exiled parts, exiled emotions. But you also have a whole system of beautiful parts of you operating in their naturally valuable states. One of the goals of IFS is to help the parts unburden from the roles they're in and from the pain they're carrying so they can be restored to their naturally valuable state. We can't get rid of a part of us. It's a part of us. And so you have many parts of you that are probably doing a fantastic job of keeping you organized and giving you a sense of self. And, so, I mean, like the small s self, like you know who Scott is, right? And that's beautiful. It all works together. There's a lot of synchronicity there. It's when you're being led more by burdened parts that are desperate to have people like you and will do anything to get that, and then you end up getting more pain because you get the opposite result. So that's where we look at these different delineations of parts. But what you're referencing, I believe, is what was originally called pseudo-self, and then Dick said, yeah, the parts didn't like that. So we refer to them as self-like. These are usually parts of us that are mature, they read, they write, they're not the little kids. They're the ones that learn models and adhere to it, but it's a manager. It's a managing part. Now, how do we know? Because sometimes people will say, I don't know if it was a part or if it was myself. Well, let's just ask. And that's always what we do, is we just ask. And you go in and say, how you doing? Doing all right? All right, what's your hope for Scott right now? Well, did he do a really good podcast? Okay, and do you have any fears or concerns around that? Well, yeah. Okay, we're starting to get into self-like parts. Mature, knows how to ask good questions, and that's okay. It would be if you were feeling a little rushed by this part or a little pressured, that you might want to just connect inside and go, you know what? I got this podcast thing. I'm actually okay, but you, this part that wants me to do a good job, hang out with me. We'll get to do this together. But that you notice there isn't the calm. And so whenever I'm really looking, what is the one way that I can tell if I'm in a really good therapist part? I lean forward. This is my tell. I can see me on the video. I've got a little bit of an agenda. But if I'm back here and I'm breathing pretty regularly, and I'm doing okay, I'm just present, I'm much more in that self-energy place.
So as a therapist, you're bringing self energy to help clients discover themselves, right?
Yes,
And then you're following their lead as they're going on this own journey.
that's it.
And it seems like, and I've hung out a lot with you, and I've seen you do this before. You have this ability to, you do like a sacred pause or something. I don't know. I've seen you do it 100 times, and you'll put a hand to your chest and you'll close your eyes. Can you walk me through what you're doing there? Because I feel like I could probably benefit from that.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm doing is I'm noticing that I've got parts that are getting activated and I can feel it in my system. Here's one of the really basic, mundane ways I know. Parts perspire, self energy doesn't. It's that simple. I have a physiological response, a somatic response when there's a certain even slight sense of urgency. And so my body responds as if there's urgency. When I can feel that, let's say somebody makes a comment and activated some parts. That's where I put my hand right on my heart and I'll take a couple breaths, sometimes close my eyes, and then I'm back. And I'm back in a place where I can still listen, be receptive, and be curious about what part of me got activated.
In the stages of IFS therapy, there is a level where the client is working on their own to just be with self and then be self-led.
Self-led, right.
And that is when all the parts are there, all the parts are welcome. And we're living life, but we're living life in a less blended, hostile, more flexible, more dynamic way.
Right. Ideally, yes. And so one of the other ways that I'm able to really look at where we are missing access to that self-energy is when I don't sense any space for love or compassion in what people are saying or doing. And when we don't have that, that means they're leading from their protectors. And depending on a certain degree of urgency, if we have people in leadership roles leading from their firefighters, there's a desperation there. And again, remember with firefighters, there's no concern about collateral damage. These are people who have their systems activated and their managers can't manage it, so their firefighters are coming in. But it's to protect their systems. Firefighters don't look at the greater good.
As a therapist, how do you, I don't know what your daily schedule is, but we have 10, 15, 20 minutes between clients. How do you resource between clients? How do you find self-energy if it's been a trying morning or afternoon or week? In short periods of time, I assume you're looking for your dog.
That's it.
And please, yeah.
That's how I sort of give myself just a nice little connection with him. He's usually right behind me on the couch. He's underneath my chair now, but I'll do that. I'll go pour another cup of tea. On some long days, I've got a little rebounder, the little trampolines, and I'll go out just because I need to keep my body sort of in more of a flow state, and just sitting is not healthy.
What's the process here? The process, if a person wants to learn more about IFS, you recommend they read No Bad Parts as a first step here?
That's the last book that Dick wrote, and I think it's just really beautiful. They could either read the very first book, which is called Introduction to Internal Family Systems Model, which was my first book, and I loved it, and it's hugely beneficial. And then I think bookend it with his most recent No Bad Parts. It's a couple years old now. When people weren't really doing audiobooks when the Introduction to Internal Family Systems came out, and then when they did begin to do the audiobook version, it wasn't Dick reading it. I tend to favor the author reading. So I like the softcover Introduction to IFS, the IFS model, and then I like hearing Dick's being able to read parts of No Bad Parts.
I'm listening to a book on tape. I'm listening to The Kid Stays in the Picture, and it's autobiography of Robert Evans, the studio actor turned studio mogul. But he reads the book himself as an older man, and he's got a deep, gravelly voice. And I agree with you. When the author reads a book, it's great.
Yep. You feel it.
Oh, okay. Did I not mention anything about IFS that you wanted to get in? I had a whole bunch of questions, but a lot of the answers kind of swung together. Do you want to name anything?
I want to say that it's a deeply, deeply intuitive model. It really grew out of Dick stepping outside of the traditional paradigm and being truly connected and curious with his clients and listening to them. And then when he met resistance at the University of Illinois and, in places where he was working, to his great credit, he just trusted enough in this model and what he was perceiving to continue to start to teach people about it and to share about it and to explore it. And so it continued to evolve. Maybe he said it, but I've certainly never heard Dick say he created the model. This is for me, I think it's like a wisdom tradition. I mean, it's there. You look at Rumi and some of Rumi's poems, and they're read over and over again in IFS trainings because it's like the same teaching. So some people consider IFS a wisdom teaching that came through the field of therapy, but it's so much more than just a therapeutic modality.
Are you currently watching Ben Stiller's Apple TV show Severance?
I don't have a TV and I don't have any subscriptions on my
Okay.
my laptop.
Well, too bad, because it's a very IFS-oriented TV show. And I think there's a lot. I've spoken about it with some of my IFS friends, and we feel that there is somewhere along someone was in IFS therapy or someone hooked onto the parts language, but it's a very interesting concept. So next time you're on an airplane and you're flying somewhere and you have your headphones, I encourage you to watch some Severance.
Okay, well, that's going to be Friday when I go to the IFS retreat in Costa Rica.
Oh, there it is. Get it, Severance. Download all of season 1, and I want a full report.
All right, sounds good, Scott.
Briefly, though, I wanted to talk about some of the polarizations in systems that a lot of people experience, and then some of the. But no, put that aside. What I really want to talk with you about is there is a sense that I get from a lot of people, and this comes up in where we're headed in our next part of our conversation with psychedelics. People want to push through and
Their
conquer
managers do.
conquer everything.
Yeah.
And how do you work with protectors
Yeah.
to not create, strong adverse reactions?
Right.
Can you explain how you?
Yes.
Because that's not how you work. I know you work. Just go, just cook. Let me hear it.
Right. So the first thing we do is we work with protectors. If somebody came in and they're just sobbing and I can see they're in a place where they're holding a lot of pain, shame, whatever, we're in exile territory and I'll acknowledge it and talk a little bit about what they're feeling, but then say, all right, we are going to come back. We're never going to forget where we are. But we first have to connect and find out a little bit more about whether we have permission to go to these delicate places. So and I don't even have to say parts language, which is not unique to IFS, but I could say, do you have any sense of fears or concerns about going to some of these places, about that pain and talking about that pain? So because with IFS, parts language is easy to use, I can say, all right, so is there a part of you that maybe we can connect with right now that has any fears or concerns about us getting to know the sources of this pain? And I have yet to meet a person that says, no, you can go there. Because even if they did, I say, okay, well, where do you notice that pain in or around your body? And we start to go there, they might suddenly get distracted. Or there might be something, wait, what'd you say? I'm sorry, I'm kind of dozing off. And it's like, okay, it feels like there's something in your system that isn't quite ready for us to go there. So which one do you want to talk about first? Who do we want to get to know first? The dozing one or the distracting one? And we treat it just like that, one after the other. And what we're doing is I'm building a trusting relationship, myself to that part, and then working to help support that client's self to that part. And we say in IFS, you always want more self in the room than the largest part that's present. We have to have a soft place for this part to be that feels safe and feels it is welcome. Makes sense?
Yeah, it does seem that there are so many parts that, for example, thinking about the spiritual bypassing parts,
Yeah.
or the therapy-oriented parts, or the story parts that just want to turn everything into some long narrative. And I'm just imagining untangling from all of those parts such that you can actually get underneath them and see what's under the surface is probably a large part of the work.
I'm just going to say that probably 60 to 70, maybe even 75% of the work initially with the client is getting to know their protective system, and it's typically their managers. So for instance, therapists have all had clients that have just told the story, and then this, and then this. So first you've got to listen. You've just got to listen and hear, and then do some reflection back. Like, I'm hearing you. Am I getting it right? I heard you say this and this, and then this happened. How am I doing so far? Am I getting it right? And you can kind of see the person relax because their part's feeling heard. And then it all depends on the time. There may be more that part wants to say. This can go on for a couple sessions, but at some point I'm going to come in and say, all right, let's pause right here. And I'm just going to ask that part of you that's been sharing so much, what's it afraid would happen if it didn't get a chance to say all of this? And then you start to hear a story that unfolds and it starts to make sense. And then I can help build that self-to-part relationship and say to the person, how is it for you to hear that this is the fear and this is why this story is getting told? And the person will often then be unblended, and I can just say, is there anything you want to say to this part of you? How are you feeling toward it right now? And that's the $1 million question in IFS. How are you feeling toward this part?
Right. Not how do you feel about this part.
Not because, right, Scott? Because that takes us right back in our head. And as somebody said to me once, we're in our head so much because it's safe up there. When we come back into the body, that's where we feel what we feel. And so that's one of the goals, is to build that relationship. So the person, and often people will say, God, I kind of feel bad for it because it's working all the time. Let it know. How is it responding? And this might sound to somebody who's watching this podcast or listening who doesn't know IFS at all. They might think, what? But it's so surreal when you're with a client and you say that to them. How do you feel toward this part? And if they say, I feel bad for it, or I get it now. I get why it does what it does. It is a genuine and true connection that they're feeling. And it really is real. And this model validates itself over and over and over again. And it's nothing where we can teach by just talking. It's an embodied experience. Now, one other thing, though, to say is, how do you feel toward it? I hate that part of me. All right, so it sounds like maybe another part is here, and this goes to your polarization. Maybe you can say a little bit about what you hate about it, and sure enough, well, when this one shows up, then this happens to me. And then, and it's typically so often a manager and a firefighter. I hate that I hate that part. It goes and drinks. Then she says stupid things, and then people get mad at her, and I have to clean it up. It's like, okay. And so sometimes they're both in the room, and I'll help the person talk to both of them. And sometimes I'll say, maybe you could ask that one, did it know why the other one was doing what it was doing? And oftentimes they don't know. All I know is it's making a mess. I didn't know it had a positive intention.
Right. Okay, I'd like to switch gears if you're cool with that, because
Sure.
I also think that because of the way I've heard you speak about the subject before, and so I know that all the internal family systems work that we just did is going to translate well into having an understanding from you about psychedelic assisted therapy, because you are in the field, so we can talk to a real professional. We're not just talking about it, we're We're talking to the real deal. Real quick, because you do IFS work with clients. How would you say that psychedelic assisted therapy differs from IFS or traditional talk therapy?
Well, I don't do psychedelic therapy.
Okay,
I
good. What do you do?
Okay, in Oregon, I'm licensed as a psilocybin-assisted facilitator. So in Oregon, the state is really clear we are not doing therapy because a lot of people, nobody needs to be diagnosed in Oregon to receive services. It can be personal growth that you're here for. So the state's really clear. We don't want you coming in to do therapy. We want you to prepare somebody, integrate them, and then when you're in the administration session, they call it, the journey space, stay back and in service to the medicine. That's taking care of everything.
So from Oregon, is this a legal difference or is this a totally separate approach than say MAPS, which did a lot of recent studies on MDMA?
Right. So Oregon is now in its fifth year since in November of 2020, the voters voted in that psilocybin could be legally used at licensed service centers by licensed psilocybin-assisted facilitators for anybody who wants to come to Oregon and experience this sacred and ancient medicine.
But if you're not using the word therapy, does that seems to say that but you still have to be a licensed professional in order to be a facilitator.
You have to be a licensed psilocybin-assisted facilitator, PAF. Right. And so you have to go through a licensed training program, and then you have to go through the licensing process, and then you're going to have to do continuing ed around it. Now, there are a lot of therapists, but there are all kinds of people from all walks of life who are doing this. Now,
hold on one second. So these are not therapists. These are not psychologists. These are practitioners.
Yeah, in essence, they include therapists and psychologists, but there can be people from the clergy. The man who grows and distributes, one of our sources at the legal service center I work through, which is called Omnia Group Ashland. It's a licensed service center. This man one of the two growers and distributors, is a retired cop. And he had such bad PTSD, and his buddies were like, "You got to try this stuff." And he's like, "I don't do drugs." And then they said, "Trust us." And so he
does
did.
now.
And he had such a profound experience. He has dedicated the rest of his life to growing, to being a licensed grower and distributor. So it's anybody. And there are people from the clergy. There are people, it's everybody.
And so is it true? Are you the 9th person? Are you number
That's
9 in
Colorado.
Oregon?
No,
in
Colorado. I was in the first 100 to be trained and the first, within 100 to be licensed. We were the first graduating class. And so, but Colorado, I'm number 9 right now. Now, Colorado's different because Colorado took the Oregon model and all the best things about it and then even enhanced it. So their licensed service centers are called healing centers. And my licensed title in Colorado is a natural medicine facilitator. And they have 2 branches of support you can get as a client who wants to have somebody sit for them. You can go to Colorado created the option for therapy, for psilocybin-assisted therapy, and build it right into your therapeutic practice. You can even do psilocybin in the therapy practice. You have to just look at what the licensure is, but that is possible. Or you could go to a licensed healing center and just have medicine session there. So you can do therapy or not.
When somebody contacts you, comes to the center, how far along in their process? Well, if a person is not coming, assuming a person is not coming for personal growth reasons, moving that aside, someone is coming from somewhere in their therapy journey. I don't know what mile, somewhere between mile 1 and mile 25. Where do you see psychedelics fitting in? And like how many other things do you want them to get into first before they come and sit down for some medicine? I
don't do therapy, but I very much do IFS informed preparation and integration. What is IFS-informed preparation? It's in addition to an intake that looks at health issues, mental health issues, maybe prescription supplements they're on, the general intake that's focused on safety. But then I ask a couple IFS-informed questions, and it starts like this. Okay, a part of you really wants to do this, right? Okay, so if it gets what it's hoping for, what does it hope is going to be different? And then we listen. I take notes on that. All right, if it gets something different or doesn't get at all what it's hoping for, let's just hear what that might be like for it. We hear that. All right, are there any parts with any fears or concerns? That's what I'm really listening to, and that's what I'm going to flesh out a lot more. Because by fleshing that out a lot more, those parts don't show up in the medicine journey. Or if they do, they've already got a relationship with me and I'll talk with them. Not doing therapy, just saying if a person shows, oh, I'm scared, can you hold my hand? Okay, what are you feeling? I can hear I'm talking to that part. Okay, yeah, we went over that. Right, this is the beginning. This is where you're going to kind of feel the medicine meeting your system. It's going to change in about 10 minutes. Very likely to change, even sooner. So let's just stay with it and ride it and see where we're going. We're going to go in and through here. So let's see if we can open and allow and just see what's here for us to find out. Staying with that curiosity and really wanting to support the parts. By having worked 3 prep sessions with those parts that have fears or concerns, it so much more opens the person up to the day of the medicine. Because if it shows up in the medicine, that person's not really in a conceptual space to dialogue around it.
How much do we need to get protectors to acquiesce or agree, tentatively to engage in the work? Because I could imagine some people are coming in and there always going to be a certain element of fear of the unknown online, or managers who want to be in control. Yep. And my understanding of a large dose psilocybin journey is you're out of control. So you're never going to get they're never going to be a 100% yes. How do you kind of negotiate that in preparation for a journey?
To give those parts more confidence, what we do, one of the things we do is first we hear them out. And then we ask, what will you need during a session that would help you? And 2 of the things are what the legal touch is. And Oregon has identified what legal touch is, which is you can put your hand on another person's hand. You can be at the bottom of their feet and they can push into you if they want to discharge some energy. You can put a hand on a shoulder. There are certain things that are all legal. This takes us out of the therapy world, and into the connecting world with somebody, especially if they need to feel a little bit more centered because something is feeling scary for them. So we can do that. We go over all of that in the prep. And the morning before I go over it. And then I show, here's how you can signal me if you want touch. So then ask, is there anything else? So, okay, we're already getting some soothing that's going to happen. And then the dosing. And in Oregon, it's going to be the same for Colorado. Their licensed healing centers aren't open yet, but they're just licensing the first natural medicine facilitators. By this summer, we should be able to be sitting with people.
In Oregon, tell me about your center.
About my center. Well, let me say, so at Omnia Group Ashland, that's where I work out of. This connecting with people, 2 online sessions and then an in-person session the afternoon prior, so they can see the room. That also settles their system. Here's where we're going to be. This is where you can put your things. This is going to be the heat. This is how we control it. And I've got extra blankets. Here's how I'll walk you to the restroom right there. Calm. It's like, I got this. Your work is going to be to just let yourself be held in a space and not have to do anything. And so one of the other things is dosage. And in Oregon, everything is lab tested, so we do not go by grams. Because a gram of Mazapatec is going to be very different than a gram of Ghost when you're looking at the psilocybin content.
These are two different types of mushrooms.
Mushroom, two strains of many strains of psilocybin, but they're wildly different. So a gram doesn't really tell us anything. Milligrams do. And in Oregon, you cannot go above 50 milligrams of psilocybin. That's the legal limit. But the average I work with is 20 milligrams with the potential for 1 or 2 4-ounce boosts. And that has taken everybody I've ever sat with to the place that was their sweet spot, and they had something to retrieve and come back to that we then got to integrate. Well, fearful parts love hearing low and slow. Okay, I can do 10 milligrams, and then we can have some boosts. Well, I've got a part that doesn't want to not feel anything. All right, well, let's negotiate. What's 15 feel like for you? So the system, there's nobody getting overridden. They might still have some fears, but it's not because they're feeling like they're not being considered.
What does an integration session look like after the experience? Or I guess, you know what? Forget that. I want to hear about integration, but tell me about the day of. What is the client experiencing? They wake up in the morning, they stroll on over. Walk me through a day.
So I go over the night before, about a half hour before, and I set up the room, just get it all comfortable. Client comes over at 9. We sit and talk for about at least a half an hour, more like 45 minutes in the room, just checking in, hearing how they slept, how the morning's going. They will have spent the first 15 minutes when they get in paying for the mushrooms, because in Oregon you pay $5.50, per milligram for the dosage, and the dosage is already there for you. If you don't use your boost, you get your refund by the end of the day. So it's some housekeeping. And then you pay the service center day use fee to be there. And so
asking for a friend, what is the day use fee?
$900 for the day use fee.
Do I get to stay overnight, or does that just
it's
you
basically
check out at 5?
You stay there as long as you need to be there. Cool. That's kind of what it's for. And the other thing I just want to say too, licensed service centers have a $10,000 a year license fee. And we facilitators in Oregon have a $2,000 a year license. This is extraordinarily high, but it's because there weren't any tax dollars in the coffers to launch this, and everybody was working on a shoestring. We're all wanting to we're wanting to acknowledge all the hard work done by the state of Oregon. So that's kind of what the fee is associated with. And then I have a fee, and my fee people don't pay until the day after. There's a deposit, but then there's the day after fee. And anybody can go to Omnia Group Ashland, and it's all right there. Everything is spelled out.
Yeah. Okay, so they show up at 9 o'clock. We take care of all the housekeeping.
It's good. We're kind of in a good place. I go over just again the walk to the bathroom and how I'll help them, the touch. We check the music on the headphones. Because I create playlists for people that sort of support the arc of the journey, and just any other questions they have. And then when it's ready, I call, and Michelle or Brian, one of the owners, will come in, and we have a tea ceremony. I mean, we mostly do lemon tect, where we have lemon, usually organic Meyer lemon, and the mushroom is ground up, and it is put in the lemon juice and a little hot water and honey for about 10 minutes, and then the person sips it. And so it's a little tea ceremony, and then Brian leaves, or Michelle leaves, and then it's just me with the client. And we talk a little bit more, but when they start to feel it coming on, which is about 20 minutes, then that's often where they'll just lie back and say, okay, I feel it. I'll say, all right, good time to put on the eye shades and the headphones. And then we're there for as long as we're there. When they start to come out of it, I bring them a platter of healthy, nourishing food that they would have bought for themselves, but I'll put it together. And then I'll bring it in, and we sit, and they're still in the medicine, and they're still usually talking a lot about what happened. And I am writing it all down. I ask people to bring in a journal, and I write down as much as I can get verbatim. If they want me to record it, I'll record it. And that's what we integrate. The morning after, I'll meet them at 10, and we'll do a 2-hour lunch, which I host if they want it. It's optional. Or we walk. And we start to go into what it was that came through them, because whatever that was that came through them is what it is that they are going to now be integrating into their life for the next, ideally, month. 21 days or so for neurogenesis to take, when new pathways are formed, when they can integrate from the sometimes the profound wisdom that comes through, then they're building on what happened that day of the journey. And we do the in-person integration the day after, and then I do a week later an integration on Zoom.
How do you, I know you mentioned before that as from a legal and ethical perspective, you're not doing therapy. You're sitting, facilitating. But I would imagine on the back end, when you've brought in the fruit spread, there's probably an opportunity for a little bit of IFS kind of language around self-energy and parts and unblending and unburdening. I'm wondering where kind of where the facilitating ends and the IFS therapist might begin.
You know, it's interesting. That doesn't happen. It's really me writing down everything the person's saying. And then, well, the other thing is kind of unique for me, because like 99% of the people who come because they know IFS. They want to use the language, but they're the one using it. Like in the journey, they can be deep in the medicine. This one woman I remember saying, okay, a part of me is feeling really scared right now. And it's like, all right, so maybe just notice how you're feeling toward that part of you. All right. And just, maybe send it what it's needing. Maybe just listen for what it's needing. They are really specific, but I'm not going to do a whole unburdening process, which is the IFS therapeutic model. That is not going to happen. However, in the medicine, sometimes people get unburdened spontaneously. They have incredible epiphanies and they feel really healed. So it's really me just capturing a lot of what they're saying. I say so much less than I would ever say in a therapy session. I really am behind the medicine here.
Yeah. So can you maybe speak to the fact that, well, I know look, IFS anyway, you're following the client's lead, right? And you don't have an agenda from it. So, and then the journey space that's on mushrooms. And by that, I mean, you're totally following their lead. Yeah. And if they use IFS language, you will use IFS language, but you're not doing yourself to their part work. There's none of that going on.
There's one, this is, I'm so glad you brought this up, Scott. It became really abundantly clear to me that there is a clear difference between self-led sitting and parts-led sitting.
Oh, I want to hear about this. Let me move to the edge of my seat. Let's go.
Okay. So self-led sitting, you think about, with IFS, we have the 8 C's. This is just because Dick likes alliteration, but here's some of them. Calm, connected, compassionate, creative, confident, if I didn't say connected, curious. It's a space of being that is really saying, I am with you here. I am holding this space here, and I may have an aspiration that the greatest thing for you happen, but I don't have an agenda. Like, I'm not going to intentionally shift music to create some effect that I feel would be beneficial, because that is not coming from my self-energy. So for me, it's a subtle distinction, and I notice where am I in my seat? Am I calm? That for me is my big tell. How am I doing here? And so I tend to feel really like, for me to just be self-led when I sit in possession of those qualities, as well as patience and presence, I'm in the best place that field of energy can possibly have as a support. I remember somebody sat for me once, and at the end, it was a beautiful experience. I was deep into a place of real gratitude. And then at the end, she put on a song, and it wasn't Bette Midler. It was like Lizzo or something. That had nothing to do with me. It's something that she loved the lyrics, wanted to play, but a disconnect for me. I appreciated her. But for me, that would be an example of a part that came in that was just happy at the end of a day and wanted to play a song she loved. But it wasn't attuned to where I was. And that's the goal for self-led sitting, is attunement.
I want to hear more about that but with regards to music, does Jerry Garcia ever make an appearance in any of your playlists? And what songs?
Yeah, there's a song, I think it's called Song for Julia, that's on one of my playlists. And there are a couple things, instrumentals that, he's been a part of or connected to. It really depends, because I have sort of a base playlist. And then as I will prepare the person and I'm getting more of a sense of them, sometimes a song will emerge, like add this, but I'll just add it and it shows up at the end of their playlist. And then I'll be sitting in the medicine space with them, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, this song goes there. Bring this song in here. And that'll often use all the songs that kind of emerge during our prep as I've gotten to know them. And it happens even the morning of, when I'm just sitting with them. I don't go looking for new songs. It's just whatever kind of emerged and is there. And then if a song that emerged didn't find its place in the playlist at some point, it just stays at the end because it still belongs somewhere with them.
So you have if I understand this correctly, you have like one playlist, which is like your foundational playlist. And then you are attuned to other pieces of music that you then add to your queue or something. And then you'll just move them up if it feels, so you're kind of DJing on the fly, but you have like a light plan.
I have a light plan, but I have about 6 or 8 basic ones. And I just see which one I'm kind of drawn to, even if I don't remember. I want to share one quick little story with you, because boy, this was a good teacher for me. I don't have any English language vocals in my playlist, except maybe at the very, very end when we're processing, because I don't want people going into a thinking place. So I'm sitting with someone, sitting with a woman, and we're like 45 minutes in, and she's in the medicine, not from when she took it, but we're beginning the journey. And all of a sudden this song comes on, and it's a man and a woman, both English speaking, singing a song, and I don't even know how it got there. I don't know that song. I was completely mystified, so I wrote a note at the end, remove this song from I don't even know this song. Take it off. So, all right. So she has her journey, and, we've integrated.
But you didn't stop mid-song. You let it play.
No.
Okay.
No. And so just noting, how did that get there? That doesn't belong there. That'll take somebody into their thoughts early in a journey if they're hearing English language vocals and they're speaking English as their primary language. So at the end, part of the integration is I send the person not only, they have their journal back with all the notes I took, but then they also get their playlist, and then anything else that might have emerged during. It might be a quote. It might be something, and it just emerged. So I send it to him and say, this was for you. And it came to me during your journey. So I send her the playlist. She contacts me back and she said, there's a song that I really loved, and it was there, and I can't find it. And I was like, oh, is she talking about that one? I said, was it in English? Yes. And he was singing about this. And I said, okay, I'll find it and I'll put it back. I am so sorry. This is your playlist. I took it out because I felt I'd put it in accidentally, but it means something to you. I went back to my journal, found the name of the song, where it was, put it back in. She got back in touch with me and she said, that was it. That was so meaningful for me. And Scott, truly, I don't even know where that song came from.
Yeah. Talk to me about, okay, so you've, they have a journal now and they have their playlist. Let's talk about the integration sessions and kind of how does a person, not concretize into this just a story, let me tell you about my cool weekend, but actually initiate, change, but not in a fix myself, more of an unfolding. Yeah, speak to integration, please.
So recently, I had an experience sitting with a woman who was carrying so much hurt and rage around an ex-husband and around a relationship because some really painful things happened to her. She had a remarkable experience where she got that, and she got this visual of a boot stepping forward, and what she heard was, when I step outside, well, it was kind of like when you step outside of yourself, you've left yourself and you get lost. And so the boot showed how to stay in, and there was a hem of like an old dress that she saw, and it was showing stay in that space. And she was in that space and said, I can actually see my ex-husband now, and it's painful, some of the things he did, but I don't feel hate for him. And she said, but I understand if I step out of me, if I step out of this space, which is really, for me, it's a self-led space. It's a space of love. She recognized it, and it was so meaningful for her. So she, opted for the hosted lunch, and I sat with her. And why I like to do this is because we really are re-entering the relative world now. We're not in the ultimate non-conceptual, non-contextual world. We're back in the relative world. We're all around us. These pressures, these systems were created by human beings. So I like to go into a good, healthy lunch in a lovely place here in Ashland and just have a leisurely time to just eat, digest, reflect, start adjusting to the sights and sounds. And that she just spoke about. She said, I have already felt the difference just in the contact with my son. She's got a son who's close to 30. And she said, I caught myself going the old way. And she said, and I got that message from what happened, and, what happened is I stepped out of myself. I stepped beyond this space. And so that's the thing that for her, when we followed up a week later, she was just in awe how she kept getting memories of what came up for her during the session that she is taking completely to heart, and it's shifting her. And I had somebody else who wrote recently, a man in his mid 40s, and had never done an experience like this before. And it was such a beautiful thing, he said, thank you so very much. My life is so much better. I'm a better person. And I think that's it. They connect back to not being protector-led. The woman I mentioned, she was so protector-led. The protectors were protecting her from feeling all those feelings, but there was a lot of rage that kept showing up. She was much more in a place of calm and equanimity. I didn't do anything except hold the container and do the preparation and now support the integration. This is just what happened in the medicine.
So there is the kind of corrective emotional experience and the learning the day of. There is this beautiful sounding lunch the next day. And then when you follow up with them again, is there a talk of like, how are you asking kind of like those solution focused questions? Like, what are you noticing that's a different, are you doing exception finding? Like, how are you checking to see progress or not?
Right. So that's usually the week later, where it's still a week. And I do that intentionally because you start to forget, right? Because the brain prunes what we don't use. And so, but I don't even ask a question. That would even be sort of directive for me. If I said, what do you notice that's different? I just basically say, all right, so is there anything you'd like to share that you feel is connected to the journey you did? And what are you noticing, if anything? So I wouldn't say even different. It's just, what is your experience of you right now? And, in essence, what are you getting from this? How is this for you? I do check in though with the part. Like, remember we had a part that was really afraid? Like, there was a man I sat with. He was in his early 70s. Had no idea how this was going to go because he had a lot of specificity, and yet in the medicine he just opened up, and he had such presence and such perspective. And he had a situation where a couple, it wasn't that long after the journey, I had known he'd had a difficult marriage, but his wife had asked him for a divorce. And so he shared what that was like. He shared it in a group. I'm going to explain how he did that. And he said, if I hadn't done this journey, I think I would have just defaulted into these angry and hurt parts. And he said, I recognized how much confusion she's had, and she's doing what she thinks is going to bring her some peace. And he said, I don't wish any ill will for her. And so he's moved out. I mean, a tremendous amount of equanimity. I'm not saying it's like this for everybody, but these are the people I've sat with. So now I want to mention that Omnia Group does a monthly Zoom meeting where each of us facilitators take a turn facilitating for anybody who's had a journey at Omnia to come in. They get the Zoom link and they can share what their life is like since their journey. And that's how he shared his.
Do you cap it at 8 or 12 people or something like that?
It's whoever wants to show up. So on that particular day, I think there were 11 who came. And mostly it's just whoever wants to speak. It's just a container for that. A couple times people will ask the facilitator questions. How long do you think I should wait before I do it again? It's a common question. I always say 3 to 4 months, you need time for the integration to take hold. And then we build on that.
Yeah, that so kind of like seasonally is what I'm hearing from you.
Equinox, solstice, that can be a really beautiful demarcation point.
Okay, I want to be mindful of the time, and which means that I'm going to need to bring you back, because I realized there's another thing I wanted to. First, I want to talk to you about ACEs. I got it. I have so many questions about ACEs, and I wanted to talk to you about your cemetery because I am still obsessed with this idea.
Yeah.
Just real quick. So in Oregon,
Yep.
a human can be buried anywhere.
Okay, no.
Okay, stop digging in your backyard. Okay, but you've made real quick. What do you got?
Oregon is one of several states where you can have what's called a green burial or natural burial, where you can be buried in the earth in specific places. But Oregon is the only state that has what is called a forest conservation burial, which means this dedicated part of the forest, which is, I forget how many acres, but it's a substantial area of the mountains that are right above Ashland, that have a designated space for people to have natural burials. So no entombment, no stuff in your body, whatever they do to preserve the body. It's all natural.
Yes, coffin, no coffin.
The coffin has to be something that's compostable. So, one man was buried in an elk hide. It's a lot of people just are buried in wraps, and there's no headstone. But if there are stones unearthed and no equipment, every grave is hand dug, and you don't go 6 feet down. You go down far enough where there will then, when the body's laid, there is something, 18 inches between the level of the ground and your nose, and that earth is then piled on top of you. That's a compostable space. 6 feet is not really. And so that's dug, and then any big rocks that have come out, if you want it engraved, they will engrave it, but it's natural and it's laying there on the earth floor. You are still in a forest and it is preserved forever. So what I'm paying for as a burial is not only this beautiful spot and this really beautiful way of restoring myself to the earth, in a healthy way, but also it preserves that forest forever.
Do you know which trees are nearby? Like, have you picked out You do.
I
What trees are you going to be
I
feeding?
have a towering incense cedar that is right behind my head, and all people are facing the rising sun.
Okay. Well, I love it. Yeah, so inspired by this idea. This is like the coolest thing I've ever heard.
Yeah, forest conservation burial. If you Google it, you'll find everything out. The woman's name is Suzanne Willow, and she is permitted to do this on her land, which is over 400 acres. So
Cool.
it's
So
beautiful.
my father's buried in Woodbridge, New Jersey, and when I go to visit his grave, if I get really, really quiet and center myself, and become a little self-led, I can hear the cars whizzing past on the Garden State Parkway because it's right there.
Right. Yeah, this is a slightly different. There's a little creek called Babe Creek that you hear rippling by. Let's just quickly talk about ACEs, adverse childhood experiences.
Please.
Absolutely so important. 10 questions that are asked that you can find out by Googling it online. You can take the ACE survey or ACE questionnaire, and those 10 questions have to do with, did these certain things happen to you before the age of 18? And when that data was crunched, the Bob Anda out of the Center for Disease Control said he wept. He said, I saw the results that identify that if we, by crunching the numbers, if we could go in and stop child abuse, child neglect, and these things happening to children before they're 18, we would empty the prisons by 60%, empty homeless encampments by 60%. So much of what's happening that we're paying sometimes upwards of $75,000 per year per incarcerated person. If even half that went to each child to support their early life strength and supports and beyond Head Start, it's really putting it into something that would support single heads of households, and just basically support families that need help. Instead of, we're paying it anyway. It's just
Right.
going
Or
to,
in healthcare costs.
and
Because if a
sometimes
person has an ACE score of 3 or more, I think like the likelihood of diabetes or addiction, substance use disorder is 8 times as high or something nuts like that.
that's right. That's right. I mean, I've only ever worked with one person who had a 9, because people often with a score 9 or 10 aren't even alive anymore. Life has been, or they're incarcerated for life, or they're out on the streets and I don't have access to them. It's really important. And since we're paying it anyway, the fact that we're paying it often to for-profit prisons, I think we really need to
Yeah.
rethink
So,
this.
so it's 10 questions that get at abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. It's what we would call a robust
It's
study.
incredibly robust because there's more and more data now. More and more people have been interviewed, and it's incredibly robust. Yeah.
Yeah. How do you use it with clients? Do you give it to them as one of your intakes?
Yeah, I do.
Me
It's
too.
one of the things I did with therapy just to get a gauge of where, what somebody might have experienced in their life, and then maybe educate them a little bit. And a score of 8 on an ACE wouldn't necessarily translate to somebody who has had the business success you have. And that tells me that you have an incredible amount of resilience, strength. Let's explore some of that. And then let's also look at, what do you sense that might be showing up in your adult life, in your work, in your relationships, in your work relationships, just in your relationship with your family of origin, your primary partner, that might be connected to this high score too, in terms of your feelings and how you find yourself responding if there's conflict. So it's a hugely important tool.
I like it because it also immediately sidesteps anybody minimizing childhood experiences.
Right. It's interesting because there's one question and it asks specific to penetration. It's, had you been penetrated? And it's there. The others are, did you have a parent go to prison? Did you, things like that. This one, it's so unfortunate because when I worked at an exceptional agency dedicated to breaking the cycle of homelessness on the San Francisco Peninsula, I wanted to work with the director of the housing to see if we could have all the clients who come in have an ACE, do the ACE as part of their intake so we could see where they were, because I directed the 46-week graduate training program, and it would help me know which student to assign them to. Is it going to be a second year practicum student or first year? So it's good information. And she adamantly refused for 2 years. I ended up retiring before I could ever get it in, but she said, I don't want to ask people that question. It's too personal at intake. And I said, I understand, but sometimes these people have never been asked what happened to them as children. And they always have the option to not fill it out. And so, interestingly, a lot of when I'd give it to the students, we'd have certain people who would come for therapy services and supports. And so I'd send the students to them, and they had the option to fill out the ACE. They would fill it out, sometimes completely, but if there was one question that was going to be blank, it was that one. So we were really, really careful with that one. That was also good information.
Yeah, a non-answer is sometimes the most important answer. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, we did it. I didn't know that we'd get there, but we got to talk about ACEs. So, Nancy Morgan, thank you so much for spending this time with me. And I found it to be incredibly helpful. And you continue to be an inspiration for me on a personal level. And I love talking with you. So thank you so much.
I can't tell you enough how much fun this has been. And I really appreciate how organized you are. Your questions were amazing. These are areas where I'm passionate. I've had excited parts up. I could see my cheeks are really, really red. And it's because this stuff matters. And I have parts so happy that you ask these questions.
Cool.
So I hope this gets out there and lots of people get to benefit from it.
Yeah. Dozens of people are going to watch it.
Dozens. We could be in the 13s and 14s, maybe. It doesn't matter. I always feel like whoever hears it is the right person.
Right on. Okay.
All right.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you. I love you, Scott. I wish you a beautiful afternoon.
Wow. Nancy Morgan. She is a good friend, a great psychologist. I learned so much from that particular podcast. For me, ACEs, the Adverse Child Experiences Survey, is really important. And I hope you should go online. And in the show notes, I will have a link for you to take the ACEs and learn more about it. And I really learned quite a bit about integration, the work that Nancy does with psychedelics in Oregon, where mushrooms are legal. And hearing her talk about internal family systems was very inspiring for me. So I hope you enjoyed it as well. And I hope this podcast is working for you. And if you like it, please subscribe to the Personal Pizza Podcast on YouTube. And also follow me on the socials. And I'm going to follow this pizza all the way into my stomach. And I'll see you later.